feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is tomato meter approved, Marchin, Eric Marchin.
Do you expect me to talk, Rohrbeck?
Yeah, just do that accent the entire review. Eric, how you doing?
I'm a little shaken, not stirred.
God. I hope there's as many puns in this review as there are throughout the Bond franchise in this movie.
It's going to be very tongue in cheek in terms of getting as many little sort of references and jokes in as possible. That's where my bad dad humor comes into play, even though I'm not a dad. So
I love it. I love it. Yes, today we are reviewing Cary Fukunaga's No Time to Die.
Is it Cary Fukunaga, or should we go by Cary Joji Fukunaga? Because that's how he's credited
his full name. Most people say Cary Fukunaga.
Yes, and he goes usually by Cary Fukunaga. In the past, the director of Sin Nombre, the first season of True Detectives, Jane Eyre, Beasts of No Nation, which I actually talked about on a recent episode of our regular show.
You did.
Who is now basically taken over the reins from Sam Mendes.
It is Daniel Craig's final installment of his version of James Bond, but it also stars Rami Malek, Lea Seydoux, Lashana Lynch, Ben Whishaw, Naomi Harris, Jeffrey Wright, Ray Fiennes, and others. It comes out on October the 8th, which is next Friday. So this is an advanced review. To preface everything, hashtag no time for spoilers is what they've told us. We will not be spoiling any major plot points of No Time to Die. This will be a spoiler-free review, but Eric and I did rewatch all of Daniel Craig's Bonds leading into No Time to Die. So we're going to kind of use this review to talk about Daniel Craig's time as Bond as a whole, basically all 5 films in the franchise of his version of Bond, leading into No Time to Die, and then we will talk about what our thoughts are.
I do have to spoil one thing, though. Han Solo dies at the end.
Yeah. We won't spoil anything, we promise. The only stuff that is free game for us, I think, is the stuff that's in the trailer. So if you're trying to go in completely dark, I don't know why you would listen to this before anyway. But we won't, reveal any major plot points or anything like that. That being said, Eric, let's get into it. So you did the same thing I did. So leading into No Time to Die, you got your Daniel Craig 4K box set out. I got my Daniel Craig 4K collection on iTunes out. And we both, not really out, it's on my Apple TV. And we both kind of binged the 4 movies leading into No Time to Die. I was watching them with my fiance Nevis. And you watched them alone, that doesn't mean anything. I just wanted to.
Wow!
I thought it was funny.
Okay, Matt.
I thought it was funny.
I know we know where you stand on being single.
So I just want to talk about how was that rewatch for
alone?
You leading into. With having no one to talk about it until this conversation.
It was sad, depressing.
You drank martinis by yourself.
I didn't even drink them out of a fancy glass. I
just a bottle of vodka. You
know what? Overall,
and your history of Bond, I guess, too, because I'd like to talk about that because I do kind of have a history too.
Yeah, Bond is one of those characters where I think for a lot of young males growing up, it's something that if you have a father or father figure in your life that loves it, you kind of inherit it a little bit. And that was kind of how I came into loving the Bond franchise, specifically the Connery Bonds and also the Timothy Dalton double feature of The Living Daylights and License to Kill. Roger Moore has always been the one where, like, there's a couple of his movies that are really good, but he was never my favorite Bond because I found him to be a little bit too comedic or a little too slapstick. But I also realized that, like, there is a whole generation that grew up with him. And for us, we, came of age during, Brosnan's tenure as Bond. And in all honesty, I think those are some of the worst Bond movies, but the Broccoli family wanted him before Timothy Dalton, but he was doing Remington Steele and was obligated to complete that show while they were doing those Bond movies in the 80s after Roger Moore. So in terms of just like looking at like, you know, coming from that point of view, I've now seen all 25 Bond movies, 26 if you want to include Never Say Never, which is not canonical to the actual series, but still kind of is a riff on the Bond films and bringing Sean Connery back again in the early 80s. When Daniel Craig was first announced as Bond, I think if people had seen Layer Cake and Munich, there was kind of a bit of a reassurance there and thinking, okay, you know, like he seems right for the role. But if, you know, you had a father or father figure, and this is coming from personal experience, the first thing that you know their reaction was is Bond can't be blonde. And
Right.
also that first kind of press tour or announcement that they had when he, you know, walked off of this boat in Venice with a life jacket on. Bond doesn't wear a life jacket. Come on. And then
It's so stupid.
I know, but that's
Yeah,
but that's
I know.
how
I
people,
get it. Like,
but that's how people react to certain
yeah,
things, especially when they see sort of this
a
archetype
character as precious as this, that
as
people,
you know,
yeah.
Ian Fleming created because he was basically living vicariously through, you know, his own fantasies and writing,
Yeah.
you know, in the Bahamas and what have you. But then Casino Royale comes out and kind of, you know, that first action sequence where, you know, I think it really defines Daniel Craig's Bond when you see him run through that wall when he's chasing the guy who's doing parkour, and
The
it's like,
parkour sequence,
this is
yeah.
a blunt force instrument
Yeah.
of a Bond, and he's not going to be your daddy's Bond. He's going to be somewhere on the spectrum of Connery and Dalton, where he has the kind of tongue-in-cheek humor and sensibilities of being playful, but he also has this lethal edge to him. But what I think ultimately, you know, with Daniel Craig's era, you know, 5 films over 15 years, um, what makes him surpass his predecessors is that over those 5 films, there's been actual character development and continuity, and there's
Mhm.
been a lot of opportunity to have him evolve as a person, where with each Bond entry in the Connery and more entries specifically, a little bit in the Brosnan and a little bit with Dalton, it's always been restarting, not rebooting, just kind of like going back from
Each
the
movie,
beginning
yeah.
and doing the same thing over and over again, you know, just don't change what's not broken. And because of that, Bond has always been kind of boyish in his behavior, and he's never been able to mentally sort of grow up
Mature,
and
yeah.
mature. And with this, you see, you know, and having watched these films, and I'm sure you agree, over the course of those 5 films and watching them over the course of, you know, a weekend leading into a new week, you see this radical transformation of a guy becoming more less dapper and more dour and more sort of sophisticated in his approach to spycraft.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that's like a perfect way to lead into this movie. And we'll talk about all the Craig movies, but like, I think that's what I came away. I mean, I'll just start off by saying I love this movie and I'll get into that. But I feel like you nailed it, Eric, where I feel like this Bond specifically, Daniel Craig's Bond, and these 5 movies, and you know, I think the franchise has evolved with movies and how movies are made, and even how big blockbuster movies are made. And I feel like they noticed, okay, we need to have that character development, we need to have a continuity, and we need to kind of have something to keep people coming back, and we need this character to mature with the world around him. And I think it's so interesting starting off as that blunt force instrument, always making kind of brash mistakes and using just his gut instead of his, you know, his brain, and just kind of going in full force without thinking things through, always ultimately succeeding, but maybe not in the best way possible. And I think it's been interesting watching him over these 5 movies, and you really notice it watching them back to back to back to back, of how both that character has evolved, how the franchise has evolved and how he slowly morphed from, you know, it was supposed to be this gritty reboot of Bond, right? Like he was this different Bond. He was blonde and he would, yeah, run through walls and he'd be, you know, make mistakes and he'd get shot.
He was willing
and,
to get dirty.
yeah,
down in
he
the
gets
dirt.
shot and beaten up, which is like something like I think only one other Bond movie he's been shot in, right? Like before he got shot in I think Casino Royale or Quantum, I forget which one. That he actually gets shot in. I think it's yeah, either way. And then as you get into No Time to Die, and I tweeted this last night that I feel like, you know, this movie, I think perfectly encapsulates Bond, both Daniel Craig's version of it and just the franchise as a whole, because I think they started with this gritty reboot. And as the movies went along, they kind of went more traditional Bond and some of those kind of elements you saw in basically the 24 movies before this. This is the 25th, right?
Yeah.
And like
not including Never.
Yeah, sure. That's where
Never.
it gets confusing. And I just feel like this movie, it's the most Bond Daniel Craig's Bond has been, but it is still that kind of gritty, bleak, kind of blunt force instrument Bond, but mixed with kind of a lot of those classic elements. And whether it's his womanizing, which you saw steadily kind of get better throughout the franchise, where it's like rewatching those movies, there's some stuff where you're like, I don't know.
But that's all
like
part of the franchise, right?
I get that, but that's what I mean.
Things that's different here, I just want to quickly mention this because I think it's important to, is, you know, the Casino Royale and Daniel Craig's Bond, there's a legacy. It's a legacy character, so you're playing by the rules of how these movies have been sort of formulated throughout the decades, right? So, you know, the things that are somewhat maybe more problematic in today's point of view is how, you know, the first woman that Bond always sleeps with, the first quote unquote Bond girl, or should be Bond woman, dies usually. And also the other thing is the antagonist is usually has a physical scar, or it has some sort of visually impaired or something like that. Like that's the other thing where, like, and this also goes back to Alfred Hitchcock, who, like, before Bond was going to direct a Bond movie and, you know, decided to direct North by Northwest instead. And in even something like the 39 Steps, there are a lot of elements that you can tell that, you know, whether Ian Fleming was writing Bond at that point or not, are there. And so they're still kind of trying to fit into that mold. But to your point, as the series has gone on, it's tried to break out of it a little bit.
And that's what I mean by the series maturing with the times as well. And I feel like the character should and does change, and I feel like what Bond is can change, and I feel like some of those more problematic elements they can kind of tweak and turn them on their head and make them, you know, still be true to the character, but have that character mature and have character development and go, okay, maybe, you know, he can still be sort of a womanizer, but don't treat women like shit, and have. And that being a plot point throughout these 5 movies, and, you know, that came to a head in Spectre, and it wasn't super great in Spectre with, you know, Christoph Waltz's Blofeld just being like, I'm the author, I'm the puppet master of everything. I'm the
author
dead,
of your pain.
Like, you know why all those women are dead? It was me. And you're like, what? This doesn't make any sense.
I have 2 Oscars.
Yeah, and so I've loved to see this character evolve, but then the franchise also go back to its roots. And what I love about No Time to Die is that it has all those classic Bond elements, but they feel modernized. Like, it feels like when you said we were going to make a gritty, modern reboot of James Bond and Casino Royale, and then you go, okay, the more now you know this Bond, we can start to introduce some of that more tech stuff and some of the gadgets and the ridiculous Russian missile silos. And like we haven't really gotten that until this Bond, and it is Craig's last Bond. But I really feel like with it being the last Bond, Craig probably being the last Bond in this franchise, and Craig probably being the best Bond, like, I feel like it takes everything that I love about James Bond in this franchise and throws it into this movie. And even though it is grim and the story is very bleak and it has some very violent moments, and I think that stays true to this version of Bond, I still had a blast with the movie. And I've just, I growing up with Bond, like, Pierce Brosnan was my Bond, right? Like, and my dad watched a lot of the older Bond movies, my Uncle Mark and stuff like that, and I would see them
Who directed Quantum of Solace, right?
and my uncle's name is Mark Forrester, spelt differently, but and he works in, he's a cinematographer, which is funny too. But and he's the guy who got me into movies, my uncle Mark, and just movie making and things like that. That being said, like I saw them watch the older Bonds, but my James Bond was Pierce Brosnan, and that was because GoldenEye 64, and
Right.
like I,
Which is
I
the
was,
best Bond movie, really.
and
I mean, there
anyone
should
who
be
listens,
27 Bond
yeah,
films.
anyone who listens to our show knows that I'm a huge video game guy, and the Nintendo 64 was at that perfect time in our lives where like I love the Super Nintendo, but the Nintendo 64, it was the first thing I played. So many hours of GoldenEye, which then made me love GoldenEye the movie, which then made me obsessed with every Pierce Brosnan. They're terrible, but like it made me as a kid really love James Bond. And I remember making my parents buy me a martini glass at like some store, and I would put ginger ale in the martini glass with a grape, and I would like drink martinis like James Bond, and like and Boris and I Am Invincible, and like
Ugh.
I loved everything about GoldenEye, and like the 009, Sean Bean's character. I forget,
I
but
thought he
double oh
was,
006,
yeah.
006, and he betrayed. Like, I just loved everything about that movie. So, anyways, the Brosnan movies, and then it was always something my dad and I would watch together. And then those movies just get more and more terrible and ridiculous, and The Invisible Car and Christmas Comes Early, and like all these
Yeah.
like horrible things.
Well, I
Where
mean, they were always punny in that way
Yeah.
as well. Well, like that's like the other two things that are
it's in this movie
problematic. Like
too.
you have, well, this is less problematic, and I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge
Yeah.
is partly responsible for maybe sort of tailoring the writing a little bit more to make it sort of a finessed in sort of being more sex positive.
Yeah.
Where you look at my favorite Bond movie is Goldfinger, and in that film you have a character named Pussy Galore,
Right.
and she is sexually assaulted by Sean Connery's Bond. And then in You Only Live Twice, which is a one of two of the kind of big reference points for this movie, because of the silo, the missile silo that you mentioned, is very similar in sort of look to the volcano
Yeah.
silo that
Layer.
Donald Pleasance's Blofeld uses. But in that, you have Sean Connery go undercover in this small Japanese village as a Japanese villager. And
Right.
that's also very problematic. And it was made fun of in Team America World Police
Right.
in one scene specifically.
Yeah.
But those are also moments where you look back and it's like, okay, you have to, like, you don't want to erase them from history. You have to accept them for what they are, but you can self-improve. And this film feels like the biggest self-improvement of all of the Bonds, partly because it is the most current one, but also it does look at the legacy of this character and even the legacy of the entire franchise. Because there are clear Easter eggs to, Judi Dench's M, but Bernard Lee's M as well. And there are references to, the other film that it is referencing quite a bit, that I don't want to talk too much about, but I think we have to at least mention it, is On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which is a film that a lot of filmmakers, specifically from Quentin Tarantino to Christopher Nolan, have cited as being their favorite Bond movie. It's the one Bond movie that doesn't have Sean Connery, that is the one with George Lazenby, that was kind of like, Connery didn't want to make Bond at that point and wanted more money to do it, and he walked, put Lazenby in there. Everything around Lazenby is amazing.
And Lazenby himself.
And Lazenby is the one thing where it's like you just wish you could go back in time and convince
put
Sean
Connery
Connery
in there,
to
yeah.
be in there, because Connery comes back for Diamonds Are Forever, and that does have a continuity where in the first 5-10 minutes the end results of
is a direct continuation, right?
Which is very similar to Casino Royale going into Quantum of Solace.
Yeah. So then let's go into that. Before, I know people we're 20 minutes in there. I'm like, get to the fucking movie. I want to hear what you think about No Time to Die.
But I think there's a lot of ground.
Yeah, I already said I loved it, but like quickly we don't need to go over every single Craig Bond movie, because I don't think that that's a good use of our time. But I just want to hear, Eric, about our rewatches. And for me, I think my opinion on most of the movies didn't change that much. I think my biggest surprise personally, and I know this is where we disagree, was in Quantum of Solace, where Casino Royale I liked a little bit less than I remember liking, just because I feel like it went on. It's only 2 hours and like 25 minutes, but that last 30-40 minutes in Venice and that kind of wrap up after the, you know, the
With
poker game and
Vesper.
things like that with Vesper. Like I love the Vesper and Bond relationship, but all that stuff in Venice, I feel like drags on a little bit too long, and it feels like the movie ended 2 or 3 times before that. Still think it's a magnificent movie. Like Mads Mikkelsen is phenomenal. The poker game I think is one of the most thrilling things, and it's just guys sitting at a table, and I love how they break it up with action sequences and him being poisoned and him going. And I just think I remember loving that movie as a Bond reboot. I had a poster up in my room. I was obsessed with Casino Royale.
Yeah,
And I
Martin
still think
Campbell knows how to. I
from
mean,
GoldenEye,
he's the
yeah, there you go.
rebooter of the franchises,
Bond,
and
yeah.
that was the joke that it was like, okay, maybe he'll come back for every new Bond to kind of
Yeah.
set things up, right?
And I think you kind of feel the same way about Casino, right?
Yeah, I really do like Casino Royale quite a bit, but I remember the first time seeing it in theaters 15 years ago.
Yeah, wild.
And seeing it multiple times, and I can't fathom having seen it that many times in such a short succession, because to your point, looking back at it now, it does drag quite a bit in that last act, even though I think Eva Green as Vesper is amazing, and I really love that character, and she really does have this presence that lingers throughout the rest
Whole
of the
series, yeah.
series, you know, and really affecting Bond. And that also never happened with, you know, the Bond women, where there was a character other than Diana Rigg in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but that was, again, at the time was considered just more of a one-off than anything else.
Yeah.
Has had this effect. And I'm not the biggest fan of the Chris Cornell song.
Oh yeah, we can go through each song too, but
I
think
kind
it's
of feel
fine,
that,
but
like, again, like all the Bond movies, they usually go for, you know, what is the most popular artist of the moment, or somebody that they've always wanted to get. And there are worse songs, but there's just something about it that, like, as much as I like Soundgarden and I do like Chris Cornell, I like Chris Cornell more when he's used in, like, his music is used in Michael Mann movies than in
Bond,
Bond. It's a little bit jarring, but then again, like, I really love, weirdly, you know, Duran Duran's "A View to a Kill" or Aha, the Living Daylights,
I
which
love that
again
Aha
are
did it.
so 80s
Yeah.
songs, and like,
And that's what I think I love that each era of Bond like is that era of Bond, right? And I
Yes.
think that's like what Cornell and then the Jack White Alicia Keys song, which we'll talk about in Quantum, feel like, you mentioned it yesterday, feel like the 2000s, right? Like
Yeah.
the late 2000s. And I feel like that actually adds a charm to it for me, even if I don't love either of those songs. I still am kind of okay with it because of that. And then going into Quantum, I think it does it a disservice if you don't watch it immediately after Casino Royale. And I feel like that's why originally, when it came out years later, it felt incredibly underwhelming. And mind you, it's still not like an amazing movie, but I feel like I enjoyed it a lot more watching it back to back with Casino Royale. And I felt like it was at an hour and 40 minutes, like very lean and filled with action because the writer's strike was happening. So they're like, oh, let's just throw a shit ton of action in here, because we don't really have to write that. We can just kind of go, oh, shit will blow up. There's a helicopter chase. There's a car chase, blah, 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 blah. I think it has the weakest villain of the franchise. Matthew Almarak's Dominic Green is just kind of boring, but like, I felt it was like a nice epilogue to Casino Royale, and that's why I kind of enjoyed it this time. I don't think it's a great Bond movie. It's kind of generic and like not much happens except there's some kind of cool action sequences. But it just feels like a okay action movie, or a good action movie, maybe not necessarily a great Bond movie. That's my thoughts on Quantum. I know you're not a huge fan.
Yeah, I mean, like, even though you're more positive, everything that you kind of said, I feel like that with a more critical
Yeah.
perspective on it, where, like, yeah, the first 5-10 minutes of the film, as you mentioned, like an extended epilogue of Casino Royale, I think is fun. And I really, again, another guy that doesn't get enough credit in these movies is Jesper Christensen as Mr. White, who, you know, is another villain again, who kind of slithers through the grass through this entire
Franchise,
series,
yeah.
and really kind of makes this indelible impression on you, and he's just a really great character actor too. Yeah, I just kind of feel like even having watched it recently, it's kind of almost evaporated from my
Yeah, I
mind.
agree with
And it
that.
is mercifully one of the shorter Bond movies, but part of that is due to the writer's strike. And I wonder that if that didn't affect it, maybe it would have been, 2 hours plus, because that's the other thing with, going with the times. These movies do get longer. They're as long as any
That's just
superhero
modern
film.
blockbusters today, it
Right.
feels like.
Although there are, we'll be talking about Venom, Let There Be Carnage, which is a
90
cool
minutes, baby.
90 minutes. So, which is weirdly exciting to me,
Yeah.
even though I'm not necessarily looking forward to the film. So, you have to look at that. And then again, like in terms of taking its temperature, this franchise has always been kind of interesting where it's like, okay, you look at Live and Let Die, and you look at Moonraker, and Live and Let Die is made in the 70s at the height of blaxploitation cinema. So basically that movie is turned into a blaxploitation film with the exception of a white lead. And then in Moonraker, it's like, okay, well, what's popular in the late 1970s?
Space Race, baby.
Space Race, Star Wars, 2001. And the big selling point is that it's Bond in space, but it's only the last 10 minutes of the movie, and the film is such a chore to get through to get to those 10 minutes.
Because everyone's just waiting for space, and
yeah, where these movies, other than the music and maybe just some of the modern sort of cinematography and editing, they don't feel as dated. Like, I think you'll be able to watch these movies, and again, maybe with some of the tech, be able to find a timeless quality in them, or a novelty or a charm, because like you go back to some of like the early Connery ones and you look at some of the gadgets, and some of them are really dated, especially with like the old headphones and radio sets and things like that, but they are very funny. And then also you think of like how accurate Austin Powers actually was to like the tube of toothpaste with acid in it. Or
Austin Powers doesn't get enough respect. Okay,
no, it doesn't. They're fun movies. And how, again, culturally and specifically accurate they are to what Bond was. And
I would love a new Austin Powers. Don't bring Mike Myers back. Like, recast him like a new Bond, and then kind of satirize like the Craig Bond movies or modern Bond movies. I think that could be fun, or it would be awful. Probably awful, but
probably bad. But
but
I'd again,
be open to it.
Yeah, and so Quantum of Solace is just one of those movies where it's just kind of like for me, of those 5 films, it's filler.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't disagree there. And then you get into Skyfall. So we're going on that we're seeing a trend now. And Skyfall is just an absolute banger from start to finish. I think I remember just being absolutely blown away when we watched that movie in IMAX. And I think Javier Bardem's villain, Silva, is awesome. Like, I love how unsettling and weird he is. I love that he doesn't show up until an hour and 20 minutes into the movie. I love that the M and Judi Dench's final movie as M plays such a huge role in the movie. Bond's history, and where he grew up and where he came from, and and Roger Deakins' cinematography just absolutely punches me in the face every time I see that movie, and watching it in 4K Dolby Vision for the first time. Was just an absolute treat. And then you're starting to see in this movie, I feel like, because this is when they introduce Q and they introduce Ray Fiennes and Moneypenny, and then like they modernize all those characters, I think, in a really interesting way. And you're starting to see some of those classic James Bond elements come back. And I think after Quantum and fumbling a little bit, they're like, okay, we need to find a sweet like middle ground of like this gritty, modern, like realistic Bond, and kind of some of the more classic elements. And I think they did such an excellent job in Skyfall. And I think it's like a near perfect Bond movie. I love that movie.
Yes, as you become Blofeld right now with your cat, Mr. Bigglesworth. No, I think what I like about Skyfall as well, there are 2 things that I think sort of quote unquote elevate it to one of the best of the whole franchise, is that they're bringing in filmmakers now who aren't simply Martin Campbell wasn't, but you look at a lot of the people that made the Bond movies as directors. A lot of them started out as editors or assistant DPs on the Bond movies. So you have the Guy Hamiltons and the John Glenns and people like that. And now you're bringing in someone like Sam Mendes, who already has this established theater background, won an Oscar for American Beauty, has made movies like Road to Perdition. And then on top of that, I like that the script and the story isn't necessarily about world domination. It's more personal and focused as if it were kind of a revenge story from the point of view of Javier Bardem's character infiltrating the MI6, which I think is more interesting than just simply having, we talk about this with Marvel movies. I think when you make the villain more sympathetic and human and not necessarily trying to conquer the world or the universe, it's just more interesting and more compelling.
And I think that's a trend you saw in basically the first three, Craig Bond movies. Even leading into Spectre, which we'll get into in a sec. They all felt more personal Bond stories rather than, like, I know Mads Mikkelsen's character was still dealing with like big terrorists and that stuff that wanted to do horrible things, but they all felt more personal than I would say, even when we get into No Time to Die, even, which has both.
Yeah, I agree with that, and it's one of those movies. Like, I think that one of the bigger criticisms is the last act becoming like Home Alone or something like that. But I think it actually works. Yeah, and Roger Deakins' cinematography also set a new standard for what the series is, but also going outside of that. I mean, there are so many films now that have that kind of similar action. We saw it in Shang-Chi, where you have the LD sort of image in the background shining in sort of a warehouse or sort of an unfinished building as two characters fight
in like silhouettes and stuff like that, which and I think like Skyfall felt like it took inspiration from like Nolan movies, and then I feel like you're seeing more,
but Nolan took inspiration from Bond,
and that's why I think it's interesting he's at Universal. Universal just distributed the new Bond movie. I know it was a one-picture deal. Just saying, eventually, guys, it's got to happen eventually.
Well, I have a feeling if the Oppenheimer movie doesn't do well, that would be the perfect time for the Broccoli family to come in and be like, okay,
even if it does well,
film to.
It'll be really. We'll get to that at the end of this podcast where we think everything will be going. Skyfall absolutely rips, and Adele's theme just
is, I think, the best song of.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Then you get into Spectre, which I had only seen once, which was at that awful press screening we went to, where it was like projected into the middle of the screen with bars on the side and the top, and it was just horrible projection. I hadn't seen it since because I was so underwhelmed, and I just felt like, Christoph Waltz was completely wasted. I felt like all the Spectre stuff just felt completely forced and unearned. I felt like none of the action was all that interesting. It felt overlong. It felt like a chore to get through. And I felt all of that watching it again, where I'm not looking forward because Nevis had to go do something that night. So you're going to watch it again? I have to, because because she watched up to Skyfall with me, and then she had a friend's birthday to go to. And I wanted to watch it before No Time to Die. And I'm like, I got to watch it without you. I'm sorry. I'll watch it again with you, like leading into going to see No Time to Die again with her. So I have to rewatch it, which I'm not looking forward to. Just did not enjoy it at all. And I think, it's still James Bond, and I love Christoph Waltz. I just wish he had more to do. And just like when you get into I was the author of your pain, James, and I did everything, and it just feels like none of that makes any sense. He's
Jigsaw, essentially.
Like none of it makes any sense of like this personal vendetta that they kind of shoehorn in there because they were like adopted brothers, and
that is the worst part. That is the con reveal of that movie. But I don't disagree. I think everything you're bringing up is valid, but I still think that there's enough in there in terms of looking at Spectre compared to a lot of the Brosnan, Moore, and even the lesser Connery movies, and saying like, I think it's just a solid action movie, and I think like the Day of the Dead opening,
Oh yeah,
cold
it's
opening
great.
sequence is amazing, and especially the single take
That single
and
take is awesome, and we'll get
yeah,
to a single take in No Time to Die too.
yeah, and I think there are moments there, and I think the biggest problem with this is that everybody kind of felt tired, and you're following up one of the best Bond movies, so it's almost like, having the Rolling Stones play on stage, and then the follow up act is like, Nickelback or something like that. It's
Sure,
just like
yeah,
it's a little underwhelming in terms of like
yeah.
who you have, coming on afterwards. But unlike Nickelback, I think that this movie, again, there are moments in there that I actually kind of liked. I weirdly think that it would have been fine as a send off for Bond in a way, like just how they kind of end it and kind of move things forward. But again, this does feel again like another filler. So you get Casino Royale, which is this really strong start. Then you get Quantum of Solace, which is more of a bridge
Filler.
to connect to the next one. Yeah, filler.
Then
And
you
then
get
you get
Skyfall.
Skyfall, which is another great movie. And then you get Spectre, which is another bridge. And to your point, I do think that the Spectre stuff is forced because that's also adhering to the mythology of the character and the storyline and what's been presented before in both the books and in the
And
films.
yeah,
And Blofeld himself, who again, I don't mind Blofeld. Like Blofeld as a character that's kind of working behind the scenes as a puppet master is perfectly suited. Christoph Waltz,
is
was
literal
well
perfect
cast,
casting,
but
but
it just for some reason is disappointing because either the performance isn't working or the writing isn't on par. Maybe Tarantino should have come in and did like a uncredited rewrite on some of his lines to
just
kind of
Blofeld's
polish that.
stuff. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
because there's some stuff in there that I actually really do like there's this great train sequence with Dave Bautista's sort of henchman character that kind of reminds me is like if David Lean had directed a Bond movie and then like all of a sudden you get these kind of again modern action takes and sequences, and I think all that
Mhm.
is really fun. um but yeah, I don't hate it. I just think it's mostly kind of minor at
Yeah.
best.
Mhm.
But again, there's so many horrible Bond movies that I will watch Spectre any day of the week
Fair.
over
I can't
Octopussy
wait to
or
yeah.
Die Another
Octopussy.
Day or
I can't wait
For
to go
Your Eyes
back
Only.
because I'm going to go back and watch all of the older Bonds in reverse chronological order, but not backwards. I'm going to do each Bond in reverse
Yeah.
chronological order. So
Good
I'm going
luck
to
with
do
Moonraker because that
um
movie is so hard to get through. It is
I
so
can't wait.
tedious.
And
And I
I'll
know I'm saying that because I look like Drax, the
sure.
main villain. From you can look him up as
I
we're
will.
talking if you
Yeah.
want to. Michael Lonsdale's villain. He's one of those guys where it's like again another really great actor. Funnily enough, Daniel Craig.
Hugo Drax, yeah.
Yeah, Hugo Drax. Daniel Craig, Michael Lonsdale, and Matthew Allmerach all appeared in Munich, which I think is kind of funny.
Oh, that is funny. And with Spectre, wasn't it like Quantum originally was going to be their version of Spectre, but then they didn't have the rights to Spectre or
Yes.
Blofeld until
Yeah, it was like the
Spectre? It
Scrolls,
was like,
basically. Spectre
yeah,
was their version of the Scrolls, where
where like they
they were waiting
eventually
for
got
the
the rights back, and then
yeah.
they were like, "Oh, now we can use Spectre. Let's
Yeah,
just
now we're gonna
erase
retcon it. It's
Quantum."
not Quantum anymore, it's
Yeah.
Spectre.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, not great. Okay, let's get into No Time to Die. I'm gonna actually put a time code down, Eric, for our first time ever. So if people listening or they'll get on the YouTube and on the podcast description that they can go to 38 minutes just to listen to our No Time to Die review. So let's get into No Time to Die. I know we said we're not going to do maybe like a traditional plot synopsis. We kind of gave that to you. It's the last, of the Daniel Craig Bond movies. It takes place, soon after the events of Spectre. You have some returning characters there like Leia Seydoux and obviously his whole team at MI6. And essentially, I don't know how you want to approach this. Should we give like a brief synopsis or should we just kind of get into our thoughts?
Well, essentially, what this is doing is it's ending the Craig era, but also trying to retcon some of the misfires of Spectre and introducing a new villain played by Rami Malek, who is using his own teeth this time around, which is nice. And the idea is that you have this megalomaniac wanting to take over the world and using biowarfare as his sort of main advantage against MI6. And this brings Daniel Craig's now retired 007, or now just James Bond or Commander Bond, back into the fold. And as he at the beginning of this movie, again, this is all in the trailer, is spending his retirement peacefully in the south of Italy with Leia Seydoux' Madeline Swan. But we learned that there are secrets that have not been shared between the two that might tear them apart. And this story is as much kind of a relationship drama as it is a globe-trotting action film, mixed with a little bit of horror, which I was actually pleasantly surprised with in
The
one
whole
of
opening, I
two
was like,
opening prologues,
Yeah.
because this movie is nearly 3 hours long, and there's this weird meta moment that's also referencing one of the other Bond movies, but also is referencing the length of this film, where they're driving, to this small town in South Italy, and they basically are like, okay, we can take our time getting there, because
getting to the opening credits.
yeah, we literally have all the time in the world. And with that, it's almost like it's winking at the audience, especially critics that know that this movie is almost 3 hours, and you think, oh god, is this trip going to be like in real time? And luckily it kind of begins to move at a pace that is appropriate for a very somber addition to the franchise, which it's trying to balance both the fun and excitement of the franchise as a whole, of what you've come to expect from a Bond movie, but it's also trying to mix that with a certain amount of pathos when it comes to, sending off Daniel Craig's Bond with a perfect swan song. And I
I
think that
like
with
that.
that, it works sometimes better than others. I think when it's most sort of alive and vigorous is the sequence in Cuba with
Ana de
Ana de
Armas.
Armas,
Not enough Ana de Armas in this. She
who's
is
amazing.
fantastic.
She adds this spark that kind of, like, you almost wish that she was either in Casino Royale or Spectre or something like that. And to
Yeah.
be introduced so late into the
Yeah.
franchise, it's kind of like, it's disappointing. But at the same time, you realize, okay, well, Craig really liked working with her and Knives Out, and thought she would be perfect for the role, and she is amazing. And again, I think what that sequence and that character does is it basically deconstructs and reevaluates what
Bond
the
woman.
other Bond woman
Yeah.
is supposed to be. Because again, the first Bond woman is usually the tragic figure. We saw that with, Gemma Arterton and the Craig.
Yeah, basically
world.
every Craig movie so far.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this doesn't do that. And again, I think that that's saying something with how the material is treated with both Fukunaga and Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Like, those two are bringing something more than just what Wade and Purvis are to the script.
Mhm.
Which again, people have tinkered with the writing before, but those two guys, Wade and Purvis, have
I've
written
been there for a while, right?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
kind of lay the blueprint of
Since the
the
Brosnan
franchise.
era, or what? Haven't they been
Yeah.
around? Like, I think. Yeah, I'll just piggyback off you, and I love this movie. I had an absolute blast with it. I totally understand what you're saying about it being kind of, somber or bleak, but I don't know. I just felt like what I was saying earlier in the show when we were talking about our history. Like, I just felt like this was the most James Bond the Daniel Craig movies have been, and I just feel like I loved that they did their own thing throughout this so far, where it started off as this gritty new reboot as Bond. Skyfall introduced some of those other elements, but still felt, grounded, but had some gadgetry and Q and stuff like that. And then this movie, I feel like, takes all of that from those four movies, the good and the bad, and kind of has it all come to this perfect kind of climax. And whether it's the new additions like Lashana Lynch as the new 007, I thought she kicked ass. Ana de Armas, I thought was fantastic. Rami Malek, I thought was used sparingly, but was those horror
Less is
elements
more.
yeah, and I think that's good. Like I like him in Mr. Robot. I hated Bohemian Rhapsody, obviously, and I like he has this unsettling kind of like Mr. Burns kind of nature to him, like
Oh,
in
yeah.
everything. And I feel like it just.
But he
in
can
that-
be weirdly warm. Like I look at something like Short Term
Sure,
12,
yes,
where
you're right.
he is very likable and charming, and even weirdly in The Master, where like as a supporting actor,
He can be that.
he's good. I just
Mhm.
think that that Bohemian Rhapsody is the film
Really
that
kind of, yeah.
yeah, it's almost like, yeah, you won the Oscar. It's like the monkey paw kind of thing, but you won it for this. And
Mhm.
you know, a lot of people now hate you because of it, because it's a terrible film and a terrible performance.
Absolutely. But this movie starts and with that cold open, I think from the minute just with the cinematography and how that scene is set up, and has this kind of horror vibe to it, and I think the creepy mask works, and just his unsettling nature, and this whole kind of prologue to the prologue of the movie. I was in from minute one, where I was just like, I love this already, and then you kind of get this unsettling opening where you're like, where is this going? Again, the everyone's connected to everyone thing maybe is like you got a suspension of disbelief. It's a James Bond movie, and as
Well,
the movie goes
also
on,
when
it's
it
like,
comes to
Mm.
sort of age, I think that
That
there's
also-
something there with Rami Malek's
The time.
Safin, where yeah, you have to kind of like maybe sort of basically suspend.
I was thinking
disbelief
about it
there.
more though, because he's 40, and like if that took place say 20 some years ago, he could be in his late teens or his early 20s during that sequence. And
Sure, but
you know, I think
the bit of him we do see
Sure.
doesn't look
I
that
agree.
young.
I agree. I agree with that. But from minute one, I was into this movie, and I feel like it balances that like super serious grittiness of the Daniel Craig Bonds with the silly James Bond stuff so well. And I feel like at 2 hours and 45 minutes, this flew by to me. I never felt the length. I loved each action sequence, right from that first one in Italy, up until, you know, the Cuba section you were mentioning, up until there's a thing that feels ripped out of GoldenEye 64 at this Russian missile silo kind of thing, that I was just like, this, all the gadgetry, like there's some stuff that's just absolutely ridiculous, but the way that they make it work in this world, I just like, there's a cybernetic eye in this movie, and like just weird James
I want
Bond
somebody
kinda
to create an
stuff
online
that-
name called Blofeld's Unlocking Blofeld's Glass Eye.
yeah.
Like, you know,
And,
like, you know, there was Nuke the Fridge for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the
Sure.
Crystal Skull.
Yeah. And like, I know it's, like you said, very somber, but I weirdly just had so much fun with this movie. And I think it's just because I like dark movies too, and dark subject matter, and
As
stuff
long as
like
it
that.
fits
Like,
for the context of the character.
Yeah.
I think because of that Batman Begins era of reboots, we got everything had to be in that tone where it
Yeah.
didn't need to be.
but I think this movie has elements of fun, and I think each action sequence was thrilling. I think the cinematography that Fukunaga and Linus Sandgren
Oscar
shoot,
winner for
like,
La La Land.
yeah, like I just feel like he uses a lot of, like, it seems like there's a lot of random like neon or soft lighting in the background that even in places that it doesn't make any sense, but it just makes it look cool. And I was just all for that. And then I think, you know, Fukunaga, I think, is an excellent filmmaker, and I think you see that throughout the movie of just how exciting the action sequences are. There's an incredible single take sequence on a stairwell that I just absolutely loved. And you know, even seeing people like, you know, Jeffrey Wright pop back up as Felix Leiter, I thought is great. The Billy Magnuson Logan Ash stuff, I'm hit or miss on.
I actually
I like him.
as an actor, but I have to, and I'll give credit. Stephen Ellison, a film critic friend of ours, brought up something that I thought was kind of interesting when I was talking to him about it, is that he's almost cast in a meta kind of way where he's also this blonde, blue-eyed, but American working for the State Department.
Fair, yeah.
And it's almost like this meta joke of what like a lot of people thought Daniel Craig was going to be.
Okay.
Yeah, and I kind of feel that that's part of the joke. But then again, like you also see, you know, Leiter in these films with at least with Quantum and this, always having to be partnered up with like someone that's kind of questionable. You know, David Harbour in
Yeah,
Quantum of
and
Solace
Quantum,
is,
and
you
then
know,
Billy Magnuson
almost
here.
doing a
Yeah.
weird like Philip Seymour Hoffman
Yeah,
kind
a
of
little bit.
impression,
I
you know?
like that. And then I just, we talked about Bond growing up with, the character of Bond growing up throughout these movies, even though he was an older man as this started. But I mean, the character kind of building on itself and character growth, that I feel like his relationship with the new Double O, who is Nomi, who's Lashana Lynch's character, that I liked
Who's
their
also
kind
in
of,
Captain Marvel.
yeah, I loved their back and forth, and I kind of liked that, antagonistic relationship throughout, but then how that kind of grows throughout the movie as well. I'm kind of rambling on a bit because I really loved the movie, but and I'm a little bit all over the place, but I
Well,
just thought it
that
was,
relationship I think is important to kind of look at the metaphor between working with other governments as well, because another
yeah,
thing that's in this is that, you know, you have Felix Leiter's CIA and Ray Fiennes
MI6, yeah,
MI6 not working together on something that affects them both, and obviously you need to collaborate in order to work, and that happens so much, not even just on an international level, but even like,
anywhere
you know,
really,
local or federal, whether it be government, whether it be police, and, you know,
businesses even, yeah,
collaboration, you know, instead of confrontation and trying to, you know, up the other one and trying to be the better person. um that's there. The one thing with Nomi and Bond that I'm a little bit mixed of is how the 007 sort of monarch is ultimately defined as the film goes on, and sort of like the back and forth of whether does it actually mean anything or not. Because I kind of feel that they try to have both kind of both ways with that, where it's like it really doesn't mean anything, but it kind of does, but it doesn't, but it kind of does, in the same way that, like, you know, you look at like an athlete in a certain sport where, like, you know, if they're a name, like sometimes they retire their number sometimes, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
they do, yeah. I think that's what, there's even a joke in the movie, right? You think that she even says to him, like, you thought they'd retire it, right?
yeah,
And then, yeah, I agree with you there. And then the way that that's kind of handled, like, I was thinking to myself in the movie, I'm like, oh, I like how, his growth and how they're handling this. And then they kind of, backtrack on that a little bit. And like, which I was like, I kind of wish they just committed, to that. But I loved their back and forth. And I do think that 007 number does mean something to James Bond, right? And I think he's the one who brought, like, I don't know whether it was like someone before him also had 007, and then that's like the moniker for their best agent or something like that, or if it was James Bond made it like that thing. So I kind of don't mind that, but I totally understand what you're saying there.
yeah. And also, even just looking at it from the point of view of a young woman of color sort of taking over from, you know, the older generation of white male, and looking at the idea of even ageism in an interesting kind of way, and sort of redundancy of whether or not, you know, you still matter when you're retired, or you still have value to the people that you worked with for the longest time. The other thing I was a little bit disappointed with is that I feel that both Ben Whishaw and Naomi Harris are underutilized a little bit, especially Naomi Harris, who's so
Yeah.
good in Skyfall. And you look at that one scene where, you know, she shaves him, and I think that's saying a lot in terms of how
Yeah.
the Bond movie has grown, where it can be still sensual and sexy, but also, you know, it doesn't have to be completely and utterly, you know,
Misogynistic.
misogynistic at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And it's just so weird because you have this Oscar nominated actor for Moonlight who since then has been getting all these like really kind of minor supporting roles, and I'm also really nervous to watch Venom Let There Be Carnage because she's in that as well as Shriek. And you know, I just yeah, I kind of hope that she finds something that's, you know, suited of her talents, and it just kind of feels like a little bit of a waste there.
Right.
Where like I feel everybody else for the most part is calibrated and used in a way that is appropriate for the material. And again, less is more when it comes to Rami Malek, and especially, you know, his affectation and how he kind of always talks about, you know, flowers specifically and poisons and things like that. And yeah, he's kind of playing into the classic Bond tropes.
Mustache twirling kind of Bond villain, which I kind of
Yeah.
like though. Like,
No, I do too. And I mean, the
yeah,
only thing that would kind of like elevate that even further, or commit to that, is if they dubbed him. Because in a lot of the early Bond movies, the Connery ones, you had international actors that didn't speak a word of English, whether they be German, Swedish, you know, Asian. What they would do is they would dub their voice in post-production with an English actor. And so
really.
it's really distracting when you watch, you know,
I
like
barely remember that. Yeah.
Goldfinger specifically, or Thunderball, where like the
Yeah.
main villains, their voices are dubbed, and it
Mhm.
almost reminds you of, like, you know, an Italian spaghetti western. You
Yeah,
know?
and I think that just, yeah, to me goes back to, you know, I think this movie just has flourishes of like classic Bond stuff but modernized, and like that, whether it's Rami Malek's villain of being like a mixture of what we were talking about of having a personal vendetta on people in the movie, but then also twisting that and subverting your expectations on who he has a personal vendetta against, but then having those classic kind of Bond elements of that mustache twirling secret lair kind of I'm going to take over the world kind of thing, which we haven't necessarily, I think, seen in these Craig Bond movies. And that's why I feel like it feels like more of a, you know, classic Bond elements. And like there's so many like different gadgets. Like I already mentioned the bionic eye, and you know, the car comes back, that Aston Martin, the old 60s Aston Martin, and you kind of have more and more gadgets. The one-liners, like there are way more one-liners in this movie than any of the other kind of Craig Bond movies as well, which feels very James Bond to me. And it just feels like, oh, he's Bond now, and like he always was, but like this, to me, I was surprised at how those elements worked, because I feel like on paper, if you would have told me like some of that stuff in this version of Bond, I'm like, I don't know, like less is more with that kind of stuff. And I feel like this movie, like unabashedly, is just like, no, we're going to embrace that. And it's still going to be super serious and dark, but we're going to have ridiculous one liners. We're going to have a ridiculous Russian missile silo lair. We're going to have insane action, and it's going to be funny and at times. And I laughed more in this than I have in any of the other Craig Bond movies. And I felt like that was refreshing a little bit. Um, and it didn't feel out of place for me. Like,
Right. So
yeah.
you really did have a bit of an adrenaline rush while watching
Yeah.
this, where I feel that my expectations were a little bit tempered due to the sobering quality of what was unfolding. And I
Yeah.
feel like the last time I had the feeling that you are describing is watching Mission Impossible Fallout, where
Yep.
that's
No, I
another thing that
agree.
we need to talk about, I think, is how a lot of these sort of spy films or action thrillers or action adventures are always kind of weirdly competing with
We're
each
trying to one
other.
up each other. Yeah.
Yeah, and you see that with the Mission Impossible movies, with the Fast and Furious films now, and with the Bond movies, where this doesn't necessarily feel like, okay, we don't need to have a scene like the bathroom sequence in, you know, Fallout. You know, we have good stuff in there. Like there's a fun little moment with magnets again. You know, going back to Breaking Bad, I think that's kind of
Yeah.
where that started. Um, it just feels like it's there to tell the story first and foremost, instead of like trying to sort of create, you know, death defying stunts that will wow the audience, even though they're there and they're well integrated into the story. You know, you don't necessarily think that that's like the, you know, the first kind of main thing that you take away from this Bond movie, where a lot of the Mission Impossible films specifically, and again with the
I
more
think those
recent
are
Fast and
based more
Furious
around
films.
set pieces
Yeah, and
than
just Tom
this
Cruise
is.
being
Yeah.
ridiculous as a human being and putting himself
Right.
out there, where, you know, Daniel Craig has, I think, a little more sense to him in terms of like, you know, I'll let somebody else do that. But everything in this kind of like, there's not like one major set piece that I would say is like, oh, like that's going to be the defining
Yeah,
thing
I'd
necessarily.
agree with that. Yeah.
You mentioned sort of the one take sort of stairwell sequence, which is good. It's very
But
well done.
you don't realize it until it's like halfway through, and
It's
then you go,
subtle.
"Oh shit, okay, I understand what he's doing here." And I mean, he did it in True Detective, and we saw a good one in Spectre, which is the best part of that movie. But this one, yeah, there's a sequence in a stairwell where Bond has to go to the bottom to the top of this kind of a missile silo, and halfway through, you go, "Oh fuck, this has been one take so far," and you're
I
like,
mean, it
"This is
was really
awesome."
competing against Angel Has Fallen when Gerard Butler has to run
Yeah.
up the
I
stairwell.
mean, it's kind of similar to that scene. I'm not gonna lie, but this is done much more elegantly and better. And just seeing Bond whip ass like that, like, is just so cool, man. Like, this movie reminded me why I love this franchise and this character, and I think they can be these kind of silly, ridiculous, like, kind of things mixed with these great character beats, and that's where this franchise has evolved to. And I think they've learned from those other movies, whether it's the MCU or the Mission Impossible movies, and kind of modernized Bond for this time of franchise blockbuster filmmaking we're in. Um, and then kind of trying to elevate that a little bit. And I think they did just like a really, really excellent job. And there's just so much more here that I wish we could talk about, but I really don't want to spoil. Like, I think there are some genuine surprises throughout this movie, and I think that's why they're really hammering down that no time for spoilers hashtag. And um more so than any other Bond movie I think that I've seen in recent, like, again, out of the Craig movies at least. And man, I just think this movie whips, man. Like, I think it's just it's so, I just had that adrenaline rush throughout the whole thing where I never looked at my watch. I never, like, when I went to the bathroom halfway through, I only went once in a 3-hour movie, so I think that's also telling. The Matt bathroom
And you had a
update. And
coffee that day,
a
a bottle
2
of water.
coffees, a bottle of water, and I had a cherry Coke during the movie. And I only went once because I think my mind was so focused on the movie that even when I went to the bathroom, which was one of the quieter moments, and the middle of the movie has quite a bit of exposition, I will say that as well. Like, it kind of slows down a little bit. I never really felt the length because I was interested in what was happening. Um and then going back into Malik's villain, like, I'm thinking about it more. I'm like, I don't necessarily understand his end game. Or like like, I understand some of his motivations, but
I think
maybe
it's
not
just to
all
be.
of
I think
it.
you just have to look at it at the point of view he wants to be in complete control of the world,
I
right? Like he
guess.
talks about being this sort of tidy terrorist type, where
Yeah.
the character is literally wanting to take over the world or gain control over with this use of biotechnology. So with that you just kind of have to go with like, oh, okay, this is your classic sort of
Bond villain kind of thing.
Bond villain just wanting to take over the world at this
Yeah.
point.
Like, there is a personal connection that I think works, that elevates that a little bit, rather than just being someone who wants to take over the world. And I think there's some cool stuff there. But
It's very
um
cultish too. A lot of the time he wears a like a
like a
blue
robe,
robe.
like, yeah, like a Jedi robe kind of thing. And like, I liked his mask. I thought that was cool as hell.
That has a very
um
Jallo-esque kind of quality to it as well. Thinking about like just more recently with Last Night in Soho and
yeah.
even Malignant.
Malignant, God bless Malignant. um
Gabriel would be a great Bond villain.
yeah, I think so as well. um but yeah, I agree with you that not maybe a single action sequence stands out, but I was entertained with each one. Like, I don't necessarily will pinpoint one specific one, maybe then the staircase sequence, but even then that's more so because of the filmmaking and the cinematography in that scene, rather than, like, he's just shooting bad guys, right? Like, and Barry Hertz tweeted at me being like, that was the most GoldenEye 64 moment I noticed in that whole thing. And I'm like, hell yeah, like, that's what GoldenEye was, running up a very industrial Russian missile silo, just shooting everyone and then falling down the
In
stairs going,
Fathead mode.
and like, yeah, like, I just remember the sound effects, and like, you get these polygonal guys just falling down, and like, that just feels like that in, like, real life. And I think that's just why I liked it. And those silly one-liners, and it just gets more and more ridiculous, but then also very poignant, and just such a great end for Bond. And it's everything we started this podcast where we saw this character have grow throughout these 5 movies, and the character grow and the franchise grow, and I thought it was a perfect end to the Craig Bond movies, and I can't wait to see where the franchise goes next, because it's going to be really interesting, because I think you said it, Eric, when we were talking, like, I think we both agree that Craig probably is the best Bond, and like to follow this up is going to be really tough, and I'll be really interested to see kind of the approach that they take, because I could think that there are a bunch of different ways that they could move forward.
Yeah, I think even more so than just like casting the next James Bond, I think one of the most interesting questions to kind of think about when it comes to the next era of Bond is, are they going to do a semi reboot? Are they going to keep instead with what they've built already? Are they going to bring uh Numi back, or are they
Or
going to
Ray Fiennes,
Ray
or
Fiennes? I mean, they kind
yeah,
of, again, like, there are photos. There are two portraits of Judi Dench and Bernard Lee
yeah.
in a hallway in MI6, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, if they're establishing this continuity, even with Brosnan's era of Bond and with Judi Dench, obviously, but like, it almost feels like you've built so much already. Why tear it all down? It's and start again, or like, where do you start if you start from the beginning? Because
Hmm.
you don't want to just tell the same story again, where it's the character getting the license to kill and then going from there. Like, do you start uh with somebody else getting the mantle? Do you keep Lynch's character? Do you
I
look
think
at
you
the
kind of
world?
have to. That's like, I feel like we've evolved, and like people are expecting, like, the Bond style is refreshing, kind of, if you think of it one way, because everything is so continuity heavy and shared universes and things like that, that like sometimes one-off stories um can just be kind of refreshing, where you don't like, look at Star Wars Visions that we reviewed last week and stuff like that. Like, that
Or
was really
Falcon and the Winter
refreshing.
Soldier.
Yeah, that felt like refreshing to me when it comes to the Star Wars universe, of being just one-off stories that don't necessarily have to be tied to continuity. And I think that could be refreshing. And you could even bring back people like, Naomi Harris and
Ben
Ray
Whishaw.
Fiennes. And Ben Whishaw said, I think he was contracted for 3 movies, and that he thinks that this is probably it for him. Like, I was just reading that. So maybe you get a new Q, because I know that's a thing as well. So maybe Ray Fiennes continues, maybe Naomi Harris continues, and then you kind of bring in new people around them, and just have, I could see them doing a one-off Bond movie next, to be honest.
Yeah,
Like,
and
uh
that might attract somebody like a Christopher Nolan or a bigger
yeah,
filmmaker who doesn't have the obligation of starting a new franchise or being tied to it. And so if they're doing their own thing and being like, okay, this is already an established universe and an established Bond, and it's just going to be one and done, you could get something on that level of, again, on Her Majesty's Secret Service, but with a better actor in the lead. And that might be something that's enticing. But then again, if it's successful, people do want more. So I'm sure that, like, that's going to be something where, you know certain filmmakers, certain studios are going to be mindful of that on both ends, because like, as much as, like, you think like, okay, Darren Aronofsky was going to direct Batman Year One in the past, and his movie was going to be what apparently was very close to what Todd Phillips' Joker was, right? And then you look at him wanting, Darren Aronofsky also wanting to do the Wolverine, but the reason why he left both projects, one, because he's picky, but two, because he just wanted to do one film, and that was it. He didn't want to necessarily
be
have the
locked
work that,
in or have to
yeah, or
build
have
in.
his
Yeah.
own work be continued by somebody else. Just, you know, cut it at the end of the movie and leave it at that. So if you do a one-off and it is really successful, there is that temptation on the studio
Yeah.
side of thing to continue it. So there is that question where I do agree with you. I think a one-off would probably be the best way to go, especially, I mean, most of the Ian Fleming stories have been adapted. There's one that hasn't, which is kind of like Bond going against the drug cartel. But other than that, most of them, even the short stories, have been adapted into films. So, um, you know, it depends, I think, on the story, on the filmmaker that you hire, and yes, you know, whether or not you want to hire an actor to play Bond to continue the franchise, or do, you know, the one-off thing where, you know, that could also be a problem where it's like you have like 7 Bonds in like, you know, 20 years or something like
Yeah,
that, you
yeah,
know, like,
yeah.
so all these things are very interesting to kind of contemplate.
Yeah. And one thing I do want to touch on too, like I do really like Leia Seydoux as well. And I feel like something we talked about of like, you know, continuing Bond having a relationship. And I feel like as much as I didn't like Spectre and, you know, I felt like their relationship was fine in that movie. Like I do think that they, you know, develop it, and I bought into the opening of the movie, and I bought into their relationship as the movie goes on. And I kind of, because again, so much we talked about Vesper and you know, her presence throughout the whole thing, and that Bond being that Bond's true love or whatever. But then I feel like, you know, that kind of puts Madeline Swan kind of as this secondary figure. But I feel like they do a good job with the opening and throughout this movie of me buying into, you know, them as a couple and their love, where I didn't get that in Spectre as
Yeah,
much.
Spectre, it almost feels like, oh, I guess you're the only, you're who's left. You know, like it almost
Yeah.
feels like it's like, okay, well, it's just us now, so I guess this is where
Right.
we'll just pair up. You know?
Yeah, and her connection to Mr. White, I forgot about in Quantum, and so I like that there was that thread throughout, and I
You
feel
mean
like
Spectre, because it's not, because she
sorry,
doesn't come.
Spectre,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Sorry, my bad. Thank you. But then I felt like I just mentioned, like I liked, I bought into that relationship in this movie where I didn't buy into it in Spectre for those reasons that you just kind of said.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
it just kind of feels like they're forced together because of, you know, the means of the script and where it ends and who's left, you know, with
yeah.
those characters.
hmm yeah, overall I loved the movie. I can't wait to watch it again. I felt reinvigorated and had that adrenaline rush throughout the whole movie, and I can't wait to see it in IMAX because the again, we saw it at the same screen we saw Shang-Chi, and the projection a little dim, I will say. Sound was good.
Oh, that's one
I thought the
thing.
movie
It
looked
plays with
great.
sound in an interesting way.
Yes, which I haven't
Um
really seen in the Bond movies of
yeah,
late,
and
but
I felt that the screening that we were at, the sound system wasn't working fully, and there's a great sequence that does take place in Cuba where it uses sort of these devices where, you know, it's common in spycraft
yeah.
where, you know,
Yeah,
these
yeah.
little chips where people are talking to each other, but the way that it sort of uses that
The
in,
sound design is really
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, and it's like almost like a diegetic sound where you're hearing it like they would hear in their ear.
it almost sounds
Um
like, it almost like when you first start hearing it, you like, you do see, you know, Anna de Armas's character put the sound piece in his ear, but it
yeah,
almost sounds like they're having like this telecommunication like in their
sure,
minds, like
yeah.
they're, because you don't necessarily see them talking first, you just
Because
hear the
they kinda
voices.
yeah, because they cut and whoever you're seeing on screen, you're hearing the other person through their earpiece,
Yeah,
and Fukunaga did a sound design thing with his team where and there's also a moment where Bond where there's an explosive and he goes kinda deaf for a moment, and you get that kind of which we've seen in
the
tons of movies before,
residual
right?
shock.
The ringing and, like, you can't really hear what's going on, and I liked that stuff, and I thought the sound design was quite excellent in the movie. I just wish, yeah, that Cinema 1 at Scotiabank is, like the screen is big, which is nice, and we were sitting further back than we normally would, because it was reserved seating. Not to be like, I'm like whatever, but the screen was a little dim, and the sound is fine in that theater. But I would love to go see this on the Scotiabank IMAX or just IMAX, even a Limax theater like the Landmark Limax, like because it should have that expanded aspect ratio and stuff as well. But I think it looks great in 239, and I think the cinematography does look really, really good. It has this, like I said, like the lighting in the movie I really liked. Like he just throws in a lot of backlighting of this like kind of you know, not neon quite, but you know what
It
the
has a
like
texture to it.
yeah,
It's very warm and layered, and has this granular quality that I think
yeah,
is quite nice, even though again, it's maybe not as showy as some of the Roger Deakins stuff.
agreed, yeah,
It does have this, again, quality to it that feels timeless, where
yeah.
like it feels like an old fashioned kind of 60s 70s film.
Mhm. And lastly, we didn't touch on Hans Zimmer's score, I think is awesome as well. Obviously, like Hans Zimmer rules, but like, and he's the guy you bring on for every major franchise and stuff like that. But hearing a Hans Zimmer Bond score, I thought was excellent. And yeah, it sounds different than, his Nolan stuff or anything he's been kind
It's
of.
not as bombastic.
Yeah, it's not as bombastic, and it does feel very classic Bond, and they do this thing that they did in a lot of these Craig movies where they use the theme in the score, so it's almost like the love theme in a lot of these movies. They use like the opening credits song as a piece of score throughout the movies, and they do that in this as well. And I just thought his score was great. I can't wait to throw it on again. And Zimmer doing Bond is awesome.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's weirdly again a more subdued score to kind of pair with a movie that is a little bit more somber in its approach compared
I
to
think
the
that will
last
make it
few
divisive. I
outings.
think a
Yeah,
little bit like
and I think the plot might as well, just given where we are right now, with the pandemic, and
yeah,
just
I
maybe
agree.
some
It's a
of that
little.
might
It makes it
be.
more unsettling. That's for sure.
Yeah, but like some people expecting to find escapist entertainment and going to see that, and then like, oh well, now I'm thinking about disease again, and what we've
Yeah.
gone through in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I think it's I guess not really the movie's fault, but it's just like bad timing of like we saw Falcon and the Winter Soldier you brought up already. Like there was that rumor that they changed their plot line because they had a similar like virus taking over the earth kind of thing where they committed to it in this movie. And I guess because we're in a good enough place to release this movie worldwide that they feel like, okay, that's not going to be so off-putting, but it is a little bit as you're watching it, being like, ooh, like it
Well,
just feels
especially in one
weird.
scene when you see the effect of it, and
Yeah,
it's just
it's
something.
gruesome at times and
Yeah.
violent, and I think that's something that continues over the like. Always shocked at the amount of violence they get away with, whether it's like arms snapping or like the axe through the foot in Quantum, or
Oh yeah, that is
some of the
good.
some of the stuff in this that's just like it's hella violent at times. Where
Or
I'm like, they
the
really.
knotted rope
There's an
in the
F-bomb as
torch.
well. Is that
Yes,
had they dropped an F-bomb in a Bond movie before or no?
I'm sure they have, because all films are allowed to have one, and
In a
it's again
PG-13
it's a
movie,
very
yeah.
subtle f-bomb from Ray
It's great.
Fiennes,
It's great.
which also works in sort of the bureaucracy of what MI6 is sort of working in.
Yeah.
But yeah, that Mads Mikkelsen torture scene in Casino Royale is
It's brutal.
brutal.
It's brutal. I know you don't really necessarily like see anything. I think that's what all of these
It's
movies
the
do such a
sound,
great
man.
job.
It's
The
the
sound
sound,
design and
and
like I
Craig's
just feel like
reaction is so
yeah, oh god,
realistic.
and I think this movie like all of these movies, even though I had fun with some of the action and the gadgets and stuff in this movie, they're all very brutal and violent. And I think that's what defines this era of Bond as well, which kind of, like I said, full circle blends the old with the new. And I think that's why I really love this movie. And we didn't touch on one other character that I don't know if you want to talk about at all, but or if we should just leave it. Like I know they're in the
David
trailer and
Denick.
stuff like that. Well, no, but we can talk about that too. But
Well, I'll
um,
just say quickly with him, I was a little bit nervous that he was going to become Boris, but
dude, I
luckily
thought the same thing.
I like him way more. I like Alan Cumming. I just don't like Alan Cumming as Boris. But I was thinking, oh no, this is going to be the Boris of this movie. And luckily, again, used sparingly. And I do like that actor quite a bit. He was in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and really solid Swedish actor. So
Yeah, I like him. But the big one that like I think he's better in this movie than he was used in another one. But
are you talking about
anyways,
Waltz?
yeah. So
Yeah.
like
Well, I mean, I
he's in
said
the
when,
trailer. We know that
yeah,
he's in the movie, and I think
Hannibal Lecter basically.
he's
in
more
this.
menacing in this than he was in any of Spectre, and I like him in this movie, and I feel like that's Waltz actually being that perfect for that character in this movie, where I didn't necessarily see that in Spectre, and I like the sequence with him in this. Like it is Hannibal Lecter, but like I believed him this time, where he's just like I'm like I just want to cause you pain more than I did in Spectre, because I believed it this time, because it feels like he actually has a personal vendetta now, where before it just felt kind of weak.
Yeah, and I think there's also just something kind of chilling about somebody that is completely contained, and you think that, like, they're no threat to you, but yet they still are in some
And I
way, and I
love that
think
they
that
don't even
that works.
explain how or anything of how he was menacing or threatening in this movie. Like there's a
I
cool
want to know
thing.
how much spending goes into that prison,
Oh
because the
God,
the
yeah.
the contraption, the cell that they have him in, that they bring him to, talk to
It's like
Bond,
8 doors to get there, and there's this
and it's all
cool like
automatic, and
yeah,
it's just like, how much money did they spend on this prison?
yeah,
But then again, I think there's something with that sequence as well, that maybe it's the the direction and sort of how certain things play out is very telegraphed.
sure,
I'll
I
say
get that.
that. It just
No,
kind
I
of feels
agree.
like you kind of know where that's
I
going.
you
But
knew
I like
exactly
I
what was
like
happening.
I like the moment between the two, and I even love when Lynch's character, when Madeline's in the room, or like when they've kind of all met up again, and and Lynch is just like, well, that was awkward.
Yeah, no, it's great. The movie's great, man. I love it. Can't wait to watch it again. I love these Craig Bond movies. Like the only one, even Spectre, as much as I was shitting on it, like I still like I'll watch it again with Nevis, and like it's not an awful movie. It's just I
It's
was
kind of like
disappointed
the
in it.
Star Wars prequels,
Yeah.
right? Where even though Spectre's better than the Star Wars prequels, it's like they're bad, but you'll still watch them because they're a part of the world, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that's why I'll gladly watch it again with Nevis, and I think this movie does a good job at kind of building on Spectre, even though Spectre wasn't so great. So, yeah, I love this movie. Can't wait to talk about it more. One of my favorites of the year. One of my favorite Bond movies. I the one thing we haven't touched on, I like a ranking of the Bond movies. Like I still think like I've been thinking about it a lot since yesterday and I can't stop thinking about the movie, but I think I just like Skyfall as a whole better when like just, you know, I'm still debating. It's like close for me, but I still think that, I think Skyfall just edges this out. And I think I like this a tiny bit more than Casino Royale, but those three movies I think are so fucking good. And then it's like leaps and bounds, like a gap between Quantum and Spectre in those three movies. And I feel like on any day of the week, depending on my mood and what kind of Bond movie I want, those three I think are just fantastic Bond movies. So I think I would place this slightly above Casino, slightly under Skyfall, but overall really love the movie. A 4.5. Like I think it's great.
Yeah, I think Skyfall is my favorite of the 5 Daniel Craig Bond movies. I think it's also the second best Bond movie in the 25 films, not including Never Say Never. And I think that there's just something about Casino Royale where it's just like it's that perfect starting point, that it's
Yeah,
still,
I
and
get
No
that.
Time to Die is still new, so I'm kind of playing it safe by putting Casino Royale as number
Above
2,
it. Yeah.
and No Time to Die at 3. But then there is this kind of gap between Spectre and Quantum of Solace. But I still think my favorite Bond movie as a whole is Goldfinger, and it's also my favorite Bond song by Dame Shirley Bassey, which is like, again, just a great Bond movie. But in terms of Daniel Craig's uh, filmography, like, I think he has surpassed Sean Connery as the best Bond, which
I,
is really saying something.
oh, I totally agree. Um, I thank you all for listening or watching. I know this was a meaty review, but we wanted to cover your dogs are loving the movie too, I think.
Yeah, I think that there's
Um,
probably a package or something that was delivered.
Blofeld's at your front door. Mr. Bigglesworth.
When Mr.
um,
Bigglesworth gets angry, people die.
thank you for listening or watching. I love doing these big long reviews talking about like a whole franchise. I hope you guys like it too. But if you skipped over it and just listened to the review, we appreciate that as well. We have tons of other reviews on this channel, Untitled Movie Reviews. You can get it on podcast services everywhere or on YouTube on the Untitled Movies podcast or YouTube channel. We have our main show, Untitled Movie Podcast, that you guys can check out, podcast services and on YouTube as well. We just did a big TIFF wrap up, talked about Chris Pratt as Super Mario. a ton
House
of
of
stuff.
Mario.
So, yeah. So God, saw the House of Gucci trailer again. If you want a one-stop shop for everything Untitled, go over to our letterbox. It's Untitled_movies. You can get links to all of our social channels, our reviews, everything over there. That's probably the best spot for everything. As always, my name is Rohrbeck, Matt Rohrbeck, and you can get all of my movie reviews and content around the internet, but mostly at untitledmoviepodcast.com. I will be returning to Kind of Funny to do a Star Wars Visions episodes 4 through 6 review today. So that should be up sometime today, Wednesday, September 29th. You guys can check that out. But you can follow me on all those social medias at Matt Rohrbeck.
And I'm Invincible. You can you can find more of my video reviews at rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at em6211.
Did you think of that every time during Amazon's Invincible animated series, where every time someone would, smash cut to the Invincible thing, I thought of
No,
Boris every
weirdly,
time?
no, not at all.
I did. I love GoldenEye. I love GoldenEye. All right, bye everybody.